Chapter 1, Part 6, Exceptionality and Averageness, Sentimentalism and Realism, a panel discussion conducted by patients. Annette, panel leader. The subject of today's panel discussion is taken from an interview entitled Average Existence and Exceptionality. The doctor speaks there of a desirable and undesirable exceptionality. Has anybody got an example? Anne, I had a silly fear to the one described in the article. My sister told me something that had happened to a neighbor. He had been hurt in an accident. I got the idea I was responsible for that accident. But I knew immediately it was a delusion, and I was ready to wait till it would disappear. I mentioned it in previous panels that I get delusions about this kind, but I have learned to handle them. This time, all of a sudden, I laughed hysterically. That frightened me. After I hung up, I had the fear that my sister would know my behavior was maladjusted. I called Rosalie, and she told me how she handled a similar story of an accident. I again got this idea that I was responsible. Rosalie said, "You know what you are doing? You are misinterpreting the event. You know that nobody in this world would think he is responsible for an accident he heard of. And if you think you are you think you are not like other people. You think of yourself as exceptional." That helped me. The last Saturday when I had that feeling again that I was responsible for what somebody did, I had no fear in connection with it, and it just disappeared. Annette. Anne has learned in recovery that even delusions can be controlled if you know how to eliminate the idea of danger. Such delusions are ideas, and our physician has told us repeatedly that ideas come and go if you do not add the thought of danger. Anne has proved that is correct. Anne, of course, I don't handle them right yet. Just thinking of these fears and bringing them up in the panel gives me tremors. I have some right now, but I can control them. Annette, several weeks ago I had a trying day and I was quite tired and somewhat irritable. I had stayed up late, and when I went to bed, my feet were very cold. I mentioned it to my husband, but he did not reply. I resented that. A little while later, I got a cramp in my foot, but I didn't tell my husband, perhaps from fear that he might not be any more sympathetic than he was at my first complaint. I became tense and felt that I thought of danger. I did not know exactly what kind of danger was in my mind. Later, the cramp went away, and it was then that I recalled that a very close friend of mine had died that week, and that there had been a blood clot in the leg. Today, it is clear to me that the blood clot suggested to me that my cramp was dangerous. As I now know through my recovery training, the patient likes to complain of something spectacular and exceptional. When I had a cramp, I should have thought of an innocent pain or a muscle fatigue. As our physician says, the nervous patient will not settle for anything less than a rare, incurable, and hopeless ailment. I think that after that experience, I understand now why we think of the spectacular and the exceptional. Gertrude. One of the ideas I had was the thought of death. In recovery, I learned that we cannot be exceptions, and if the average man and woman can think of death, we can too. But in the beginning, I was afraid of the thought. Now, now I can think of death as the average person does. I live only a short distance from 3 cemeteries, but most of the time I'm not even aware of being there. Carol. If I am among people, I feel I want to be the tops, but I feel I am not genuine. Our physician has told me that means I hope to be exceptional, but fear that I am not even average. On the train, I think of the people that I think people are watching me. I know now that this is what our doctor calls the sense of undesirable exceptionality. I also want to be an exceptional mother, but I don't handle it right. I feel I have to watch Susie, my little daughter, every minute of the day. The other day, when a neighbor girl came over and asked whether Susie could have lunch with her, I got objective about it and let her go. Annette, what happened when you went against your desire to keep an eye on Susie? At first, I had all kinds of wild thoughts of danger. But then I said, all right, I'm going to say no to my sensations and feelings and be like my neighbor. I was tense, but I dropped the sense of exceptionality and was no longer afraid of being average. Sophie, the other day I went to the basement to do my washing. The children were home from school. I said, I'm going downstairs and don't make noise. As soon as I went, the noise started. I became furious. I shouted up to them to stop that noise, but they made such a racket they didn't even hear me. I felt so frustrated I felt like crying. I dropped the linen and I couldn't move for a few minutes. It seemed to me I was paralyzed. Then I stopped and looked into myself and said, what are you doing? I was setting an exceptional standard for my children not to make noise. When I recognized I had that that standard, the tenseness left me and I went on with my work. Frank, I can give an example. It is not so dramatic. It happens frequently that I have something to do and I just don't want to do it, and I don't know why. I just can't get started. I am now working on the recovery news and it is necessary to type up the stencil. It is a simple job, but it takes me a week or more to warm up to it. I think it is because I don't think it is good enough. I guess my standard is too high, and I still think in terms of exceptionality. When I realized that I just made up my mind that I would type up the stencil and I did it in no time. If I hadn't done the work, I would have condemned myself and got more tense. After I finished, I felt quite proud of myself, and there was no vicious cycle as there usually is when I procrastinate. Exceptionality and averageness, sentimentalism and realism. Physicians comment on panel discussion. When Anne, in distraction, turned for help to Rosalie, she was warned not to consider herself different from other people. If she did, she thought of herself as exceptional and not as being like other people. I shall ask, do you really believe that anyone with a spark of vitality and ambition will content himself with being like other people? To have no other qualities than the ones found in other people means to be colorless, ordinary, dull, perhaps common and commonplace. Who would relish the reputation of being unimaginative, impersonal, nondescript? People wish and crave to have distinction, singularity, personality, and character. They shudder at the thought of being just a cipher, one of many, nothing but average. What men and women actually hope, boast, and pretend is to be exceptional. And if patients think of themselves as being not just average, they do what everybody does. Why do I then urge them to shed their sense of exceptionality? Exceptionality is a hope, a dream, an illusion. That means an imagination. Averageness is the reverse. It is a subtle fear, a sober fact, a disillusioned self appraisal that means a plain, uninspiring reality. People hope to be exceptional and fear to be nothing but average. If you choose to live in a world of hopes, dreams, and illusions, you are a sentimentalist. If you prefer the realm of factual existence in everyday life, you are a realist. But you are not permitted to make a choice or to state your preference. You are what you are, sentimental and realistic, imaginative and matter of fact at the same time. What counts is the proportion, balance, and ratio. Does your realism outweigh your sentimentalism, or does the balance tilt in the opposite direction? I am fond of believing that my patients represent a wholesome and desirable cross section of the general population. If that is true, their personalities are as well or ill balanced between sentimentalism and realism as those of their relatives, neighbors, and friends. They feel just as exceptional and are just as average as the social set in which they belong. When they deal with their children, their wives, their mothers, and fathers, they indulge in a pardonable sense of exceptionality, taking pride in the supposed superior qualities of their family, clan, or race. But I doubt whether my patients carry this sentimental bias into the regions of business, social activities, and home management. There they are exactly as realistic and average-minded as the situation requires. The sentimental trend exhibited in one sphere of life is neatly balanced by a corresponding realistic attitude governing their activities in other spheres. There's a solid balance, sound proportion, sane ratio. If I ask my patients to be realistic instead of sentimental, if I insist that they renounce their romantic sense of exceptionality in favor of a sober self accounting in terms of averageness, I refer to the attitude they are supposed to take with regard to their symptoms. There they must not indulge in sentimental dreams of exceptionality. There they must plant themselves solidly on the ground of realistic averageness. If the average person experiences pressure in the head, he does not permit himself to be rushed into a hysterical panic. He suffers but remains calm. True, my patients suffer from conditions that are not average in intensity and duration. Nevertheless, I ask them to retain their balance even in the face of extreme agonies. Anne demonstrated with singular clarity how this can be done. She had a delusion and manipulated it as an average experience. How could she manage to think she was like other people at the very moment her brain was at the seat of delusion? Do people have delusions on an average? What Anne did was exceptional. It was the exact reverse of what could be expected on an average. She turned realist and was calm and poised in a situation that was frightening, exceptional, and extraordinary. With this, she carried the principle of averageness, the very limits of plausibility and possibility. Such feats are possible in recovery, and in recovery there are no feats. There, there they are average occurrences, the result of patient and systematic training. What Anne demonstrated was that under our system of training, sentimentalism can be so thoroughly overbalanced by realism that even under exceptional circumstances, the sense of averageness can be made to assert itself successfully. Delusions, of course, outside the domain of realism are, of course, outside the domain of realism, and there can be no objection to ranging them among the sentimentalities of thoughts or wishes. If a patient claims to be Napoleon, if another thinks he is being observed and watched and spied on as if he were an important personage, you may call the one a delusion of grandeur and the other a delusion of persecution. But in essence, it is romanticism and sentimentalism. Annette and Gertrude mentioned no delusions. They reported their experiences with the fear of a blood clot, the dread of dying. Is the fear of a blood clot sentimental? Average people certainly worry about death and vascular accidents. And if Carol worried about her daughter Susie, and Sophie became furious with the noise made by her children, and Frank couldn't get himself to warm up to a simple job, what is the warrant for calling these reactions sentimental or exceptional? Take the case of Annette. Her feet were cold and developed a cramp. This was an experience of discomfort and pain. The experience as such had all the earmarks of averageness. What could be more average than the commonplace than cold feet and crampy muscles? There is no distinction, no glamour, no excitement in coldness and crampiness. The incident is so trivial that it cannot excite interest. It could certainly not be used as the subject for storytelling. The moment Annette conceived the suspicion that the cold feet and crampy muscles might be the result of a blood clot, well, there was a plot for an exciting story that could stir the imagination. With a mere chilly skin and a cramping muscle, her experiences were drab, trivial, uninteresting, and uneventful. But with a clot, there was danger, excitement, and drama. A blood clot is not everyday life. It is a dire emergency, a tragedy, perhaps a good story. To reach the dizzy heights of emergency and tragedy, Annette had to infuse the elements of temper and emotionality into an event that was otherwise plain, simple, and devoid of thrill. Take now the case of Carol. She was worried about the health of her daughter Susie. On the face of it, no sentimentalism seems to be involved in a mother's concern for the health of her child. A concern of this kind is realistic and average. Even if Carol felt she had to watch her daughter every minute of the day, the sentiment was still within the scope of average anxiety, although decidedly overdone. But when Carol carried her apprehensiveness to the extent of refusing Susie to be watched by a neighbor whom she knew to be a responsible person, she displayed an unrealistic distrust in the reliability of the average person and indulged in what she called herself a sense of undesirable exceptionality. She set herself up as the only person to whom Susie's welfare could be entrusted. She alone had the requisite sense of responsibility. The others could not be relied on. Moreover, she conceived of Susie as a child that needed special watching, extraordinary care, exceptional sentiments of exaggerated duties and responsibilities that have no place there. Suppose Susie, while attending the luncheon in a nearby home, hurt her leg or felt a tummy ache, or got involved in a fracas with the other children. The hostess could certainly be credited with ample sense of duty and responsibility to take proper care of the situation. You see, Annette and Gertrude exaggerated the importance of their own bodily feelings and sensations and became emotional. Carol gave herself over to a vastly exaggerated sentiment of duty and responsibility and became sentimental. You will now understand what the terms emotionalism and sentimentalism imply. Emotionalism means that plain and innocent sensations, impulses, and feelings aroused by events of average intensity are conceived as so alarming that nothing short of an extraordinary fear reaction seems to suit the situation. Sentimentalism means that equally plain and average experiences are viewed as so exalted and valuable that nothing short of an excessive sense of duty and responsibility can meet the requirements of the momentous event. Average life consists of trivialities mainly. Average home life, for instance, calls for buttons to be sewed, dishes to be washed, children to be watched, pain and discomfort to be endured. All of this is routine, offering little stimulation or excitement, and providing a great deal of irritation, a good measure of drudgery, and some amount of suffering. Occasionally there is a birth, or a wedding, or sickness or death, when the routine is interrupted by an exceptional event, but is resumed in all its deadly monotony as soon as the event has passed. The irrational The irritation incidental to this sort of routine life is patiently borne by persons who are not too irritable, but nervous patients are unfortunately blessed with an excess of irritability. As a result, the average irritations of routine existence are well nigh unbearable to them. They hate the routine chores. Routine to them is an infliction. It inflicts disturbing sensations, confusions, doubts, and anxieties. To the average housewife, the breaking of a glass is a plain occurrence not to be fussed over. It causes a mild irritation that is easily disposed of by the consideration that the loss is trivial and replacement is easy. But to the nervous housewife, the breakage may suggest that she is inadequate, that all effort is futile, that the inefficiency, incoordination, and lack of attention revealed by the dropping of the glass are beyond hope. She may now become provoked at herself and work herself up to a pitch of excitement and emotionalism. Or she may bring into play the sentiment of self-pity and condemn herself as a neglectful person, oblivious to duty and responsibility. Then sentimentalism and emotionalism join hands to create exceptional fury in response to an event of average triviality. The excess irritability of my patients predisposes them to grotesque hatred of routine. With the average housewife, sewing buttons and darning socks do not figure as exalted tasks or sources of great excitement. They are chores, devoid of thrill and inspiration. The darning is done for the husband, and the sewing for the son. Being meant for the ones she loves, the activity requires a significant meaning in the eyes of the housewife. Every stitch and every patch has the meaning of doing something necessary, useful, and valuable. Life is still a chore and an unpleasant routine, but the routine is now meaningful, important, perhaps even vital. The inherent meaning of the work creates enjoyment. The enjoyment provides stimulation, giving a sense of living, a feeling of accomplishment. Added to the feeling of joy and satisfaction is the realization that the mending and patching constitute a duty performed and responsibly discharged. In this manner, the feeling of joy is supplemented by the sentiment of dutiful and responsible activity. Life of this kind is one of sustained feeling and sentiment. It is vibrant, stimulating, perfused with a zest and interest. We may draw the same picture of the average man working in a shop or at an office desk. The work itself may be boring and dull routine, repetitious and tiring, but if done with an eye to its usefulness and meaningfulness in terms of maintaining the family, the otherwise uninteresting job assumes the aspect of importance, dignity, duty, and responsibility. The shop or the one for whom they are performed produces the feeling of joy and the sentiments of responsibility, dependability, and consistency. You will realize now that for routine to become palatable and acceptable, it must be capable of supplying a moderate amount of feelings and sentiments. The feelings are mainly those of joy, satisfaction, and stimulation. The sentiments are those of duty and responsibility, and their attendant sense of dependability, consistency, dignity, and self importance. Viewed against this backdrop, the nervous patient is in a pitiable condition. When the housewife, incapacitated by a nervous ailment, sets out on her sewing performance, her fatigue interferes with the nimbleness of her movements. The muscles feel heavy, the fingers cramp, the lids droop wearily. Being determined to finish the job may continue the dreary occupation. The work is done mechanically. Every stitch requires the utmost in effort. The needle lies limp between the fingers. The garment flops to the floor. She picks it up, resumes the sewing, but she has to use every ounce of her flagelling energy to perform the simplest movement of the hand. Finally, she gives up in despair. There is no use trying to do something for husband and child. This drop of joy, drained of every semblance of importance, usefulness, or value, there is no possibility of experiencing feelings or sentiments in this atmosphere of utter futility and helplessness. Unable to infuse feelings and sentiments into the routine of the daily activity, the nervous patient endeavors to eliminate routine from life altogether. The formula is simple. There must be nothing trivial, meaningless, unimportant in the sphere of daily sentiments. Plain conversations, questions, and answers must not be tolerated. They must be converted into a stirring argument or an intense fight or a pathetic complaint. The fight makes room for feelings of indignation. The complaint provides the setting for sentiments of self pity or self blame. All of it is absurdly exaggerated and morbidly intensified. But the illusion is created that feelings and sentiments are again governing the daily activities. That is the feeling that the feelings have degenerated into wild emotionalism and sentiments, into vapid and shallow sentimentalism does not count. Life is again pulsating, vital, important. True, its vitality and importance have been derived from an underhanded trick that falsifies feelings and sentiments into something that only remotely resembles them. The fact is that the life pulse, no matter how shaky, has been restored, and the vitality, no matter how empty, has been recaptured. Trick or no trick, life is and seems worth living again. This is the end of the 6th part of chapter 1. Thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next installment of Mental Health Through Will Training by Abraham A. Lowe. Thank you.